done with the trouble of the world, trouble of the world, trouble.
We have developed a new exhibit on the Underground Railroad that will be installed at Rokeby over the next 2 years. If you know anything about Rokeby Museum, it's probably that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. But you may not know that it is one of the best documented, if not the best documented, such sites in the country. And when this exhibit opens, there will be nothing else like it in the Northeast. Now I want to say a few words about the Underground Railroad, always starting with, 1, it wasn't a train, and 2, it didn't go underground, just in case. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the clandestine journey that enslaved people took from bondage in the South to freedom in the North or in Canada in the decades before the Civil War. Some of these fugitive slaves made their way to Vermont, and our exhibit focuses on 2, Simon and Jesse. Simon and Jesse were both sheltered at Rokeby in the 1830s, and their stories were preserved in letters in the museum's collection. These letters are the historic texts on which our exhibit is based. What these letters tell us is that Vermont was a safe haven for fugitives, and that the men and the women who came to Rokeby were seeking work as well as safety. When finished, the exhibit will be 2,500 square feet, and in the middle of it, visitors will have a chance to sit down. It's always welcome in a big exhibit, a chance to sit down and experience what exhibit designers call an object theater. An object theater is a hybrid art form. It uses recorded sound and sound effects and special lighting effects combined with historic artifacts to convey a narrative or short drama. It's a sort of an actorless play. Our object theater tells Jesse's story, and that is the drama you are about to hear. But I need to tell you a little bit about Jesse first, because if you had visited the exhibit, there's a certain amount that you would already know about him coming into the object theater, and it will help you place what you're about to hear in context. Jesse was born enslaved in the household of Joseph Elliott in Perquimans County, North Carolina, around 1810. In 1824, Joseph Elliott died unexpectedly, and he left no will. Now, this must have been a terrible blow for his family because he had 7 young children. But it was far more calamitous for the enslaved members of the household. Joseph Elliott held 13 slaves, 4 adults, and 9 children. And they would now be scattered, hired out to work wherever their labor could command a wage. The slaves were grouped together in lots of 2 and 3, their names written in lots on pieces of paper and dropped into a receptacle. Joseph Elliott's 7 children then each drew out one of those papers, and their future security depended on the work those named would do. Joseph's son Ephraim pulled the paper that said, "Boy Jesse, old Luke's wife Charity." So these were the 2 who would be sent out to work in support of young Ephraim. Jesse and Ephraim were nearly the same age, about 14 in 1824, and they had grown up together. Certainly they had been playmates, maybe even friends. When Ephraim came of age in 1831, he received a 75-acre parcel of land and 1 slave, Jesse. He was listed with that property in the county tax list every year until 1836, when the 1 slave disappeared. Jesse had escaped. How we do not know, but amazingly, he had made his way all the way to northwestern Vermont and Rokeby. And that is where the play you are about to hear begins.
in Gilead to make the wounded all daughters abound in Gilead to heal the sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged, and I think my work in vain. But then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. Lord, there's a balm in Gilead to make the wounded all. Yes, a balm in Gilead to heal the sick soul.
Scene 1, North Ferrisburg, Vermont, March 12, 1837. A sheep barn toward the end of winter. Early morning. Sounds of sheep milling about, pigeons in the rafters. Perhaps some Canadian or snow geese going north in the sky overhead. The sound of wooden gates opening and closing. Jessie and Mingo are in the sheep barn. And since it is a sunny, warm, early March day, pen by pen, Jessie and Mingo turn the sheep out into the snowy pastures around the barn. And as they do, they talk to the sheep and to each other.
Come on now. Winter's almost over. It's nice outside today. Get on out there now. Come on, y'all need some fresh air.
Get on. Get out there. It's good for you. Fresh air is good for you. Ah, sheep. I hate animals. Vegetables is more tractable.
Mingo, listen to this. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee?
Poetry.
Sure is.
Where'd you get that?
I learned it in my reading class, and I can read it too.
You be getting somewhere, Jesse.
I be.
Only you better watch out. Keep that up and you're going to be theeing and thouing like the rest of these Quakers around here.
Dost thou think so?
Come on, let's go and get some breakfast.
As Jesse and Mingo walked toward the house and kitchen.
How long you been here now, Jesse?
Almost exactly 1 year. What about you?
Lord, I've been a Robinson relation for almost 30 years.
And when did you get free?
When I became a man, my master set me free, and I've been a free man ever since. I'll be almost 60 now.
Whoo! You're an old man, Mingo. I be heading that way too, both those ways. I'll get old on my own, but free I got to work at. And that's why today is a special day for me. I've earned $150 since I come here, and I'm getting together today with Mr. Robinson. I hope. We're going to write a letter to my master in North Carolina so I can buy my freedom with the money I have earned myself. This whole past year I've been waiting for this day. By the time that letter gets back here, I'm going to be a free man, Mingo. A free man, just like you and Mr. Robinson.
That's right, and that's good.
Jesse and Mingo enter the house and kitchen.
Morning, Mr. Robinson.
Morning, Mingo. Morning, Jesse.
Mr. Robinson, we turned the sheep out, as many as we could get to go.
Excellent.
I was wondering after we all have our breakfast, I was wondering if we could...
Yes. Yes, I know. Today is the day we shall write the letter, Jesse. Let us go into the parlor and compose the letter right now. Does thee think thee can write this letter thyself, Jesse?
Oh, I don't know, Mr. Robinson. I've been working hard all year on my reading and writing. I've been studying hard.
I know thee has. That's why I asked thee.
I can read now, some. And that's more than my master down in North Carolina can do. He can't read a word, don't you know, nor can he write.
Truly.
But I can read and write too now, a little, but I don't think I'm just exactly ready to write a whole letter all by myself today.
That's quite all right, Jesse. We can compose the letter together.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I want to tell you, Mr. Robinson, how grateful I am to you for all y'all have done for me. Letting me stay here this past year, paying me for my labor, teaching me how to read and write. I'm grateful. I'm forever in your debt. You're a kindly man, Mr. Robinson.
I'm grateful for your thanks, Jesse, but thee needn't thank me. You earned the money with your own skill and diligence and saved it as well with your frugality and thrift, all virtues admirable in any man.
Thank you, sir.
What I have done is the right thing to do. It is what our Heavenly Father asks of all of us, and I would do it for anyone.
But you did it for me.
As I would for anyone in your predicament.
Yes, sir.
But I do thank you for your kind words, Jesse.
Yes, sir.
Shall we begin?
Yes, sir.
12th of 3rd month, 1837, North Ferrisburgh, Vermont. To Ephraim Elliott of Perquimans County, North Carolina. Ephraim Elliott. I write to thee, friend, this day in favor of my hired man here on my farm in Ferrisburgh, Vermont. This man who is called Jesse, and with whom thee is well and for a long time acquainted. More than a year ago, Jesse made his way to this place, and has since his arrival labored with great skill and ardent diligence in my fields and gardens and among my stock. Over this past year I have paid Jesse a fair price for his labor, and by showing great frugality and thrift, out of the pay I have proffered him, Jesse has, by his own industry and economy, laid up the sum of $150, which he is now willing to give, the whole of this sum, to thee in exchange for his freedom. This is the entirety of his savings which he now possesses, and he wishes to send it to thee by way of a purchase price for his sacred freedom. Both Jesse and I feel that the sum of $150 is an adequate amount for the purchase of his release. Jesse and I, therefore, both most earnestly hope that thee will inform us soon of the result of thy mind in this case. Please accept my own and Jesse's sincere desire for thy prosperity and happiness. Thy friend, Rowland T. Robinson.
Good.
Scene 2, Perquimans County, North Carolina, April 19, 1837. Ephraim Elliott dictates a letter to a neighbor who can read and write.
To Rowland T. Robinson, your letter of 12th March is before me in regard to my Negro Jesse. His situation at this time places it in his power to give me what he thinks is proper. But I do not feel disposed to make any title for him for less than $300, which is not more than 1/3 what I could have had for him before he absconded if I had been disposed to sell him. But I have never had any such intention. I should like for him to return to North Carolina if he should think it proper. He may be assured that I will not sell him, but I cannot expect it, as he at this time is entirely out of my reach and may not wish to place himself in my power again. I never intended that he should remain a slave longer than 3 or 4 years from the time he left. Jesse is a man that I have great regard for, and that I am in hopes will do well. As Jesse may have told you, we grew up together here. We were childhood playmates. We are almost the same age. Jesse, I believe, is a few years my senior. I have, as I have said, a great regard for Jesse, and I have always had. He is, however, my property, and as such the amount you proffered is not adequate to dispense with my claim on my property. Wait, let's strike out what I said about growing up together and being playmates and being almost the same age. Let's take that out. Let's begin again at Jesse is a man that I had great regard for. Jesse is a man that I had great regard for. I am in hopes that he will do well. I should like to hear from him from time to time. If he should be disposed, to give me the above sum, he can forward the money to someone with instructions to take a bill of sale. Respectfully, your friend, Ephraim Elliott.
Ephraim Elliott. I know this must be a disappointment to you.
Truly.
I have composed my response to the letter I have just read to you, and I hope you will hear me out as I read it to you. 3rd, 5th month, 1837. Ephraim Elliott, thy letter of the 19th was received last evening, and I regret to find that the sum thou requires for the freedom of Jesse places this desirable object, the most anxious wish of his heart, beyond his reach. As I have mentioned to you in my first letter, since leaving thy service, he has, by his industry and economy, laid up $150, and he is willing to give the whole of this sum for his freedom. The whole of his savings is all that he can offer. For much as I and his other friends here may desire his liberty, I am bound to inform thee, without the least wish to offend, that we cannot consciously contribute anything toward the purchase of a slave, even for his liberation, because we believe it would be recognizing a principle which God forbids. If Jesse was in possession of a larger sum, he would freely offer it all for his freedom. I therefore hope thou wilt feel disposed to consider the case of one for whom thou hast so great a regard, and accept his offer, which, considering his present circumstances and location, must be acknowledged as liberal. Shouldst thou feel disposed to accept this offer, I would propose thy forwarding the relinquishment of thy title to some person in whom thou canst confide, either in New York town or Boston, who will receive the money on delivery of thy said discharge. Please to inform me soon of the result of thy mind in the case, and accept my own and Jesse's sincere desire for thy prosperity and happiness. Thy friend, Rowland T. Robinson.
With all due respect to you, Mr. Robinson, I don't sincerely desire Mr. Elliott's prosperity and happiness. I sincerely desire my own prosperity and happiness.
I know you do, Jesse.
Now what am I going to do?
I don't know. Perhaps Mr. Elliott will reconsider.
Scene 4. Perquimans County, North Carolina, June 7th, 1837. Ephraim Elliott dictates another letter.
Respected friend, I received thy acceptable letter dated 5th month. I must inform thee that I do not feel disposed to take any less than I stated before. I don't know how Jesse could, with clear conscience, wish me to take any less than what I before stated. If Jesse has a desire to come back, I wish he would express his designs in another letter, stating his determinations. If he feels disposed to come back, I will meet him at any place that he will mention, and no sum of money or no temptation shall separate us. But if he does not wish to return, I will
if he does not
make
wish to
the
return,
transfer.
I will make the transfer to any friend of his that he will mention
for the sum before stated. Thy friend, Ephraim Elliott.
My friend Ephraim Elliott. As I said before, Jesse, I know how disappointed he must be.
Must be? Must be?
I can imagine.
No, you can't. Mr. Robinson, will you loan me the money?
The additional $150?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Jesse, but the institution of slavery is a heinous sin in the sight of God and man, and I cannot in any way, as I stated in my first letter, participate in it. Not in any way. Not even by giving thee a loan. I simply cannot support the institution of slavery.
Ain't I a man?
What?
You said that slavery is a heinous sin against God and man.
I did.
Ain't I a man?
Thee is, Jesse.
Then slavery is a heinous sin against me. You have it in your power to free me from my bondage and this sin.
I cannot in good conscience do that, Jesse.
Then you are keeping me a slave. How can you in good conscience keep me a slave?
Thee needn't raise thy voice to me, Jesse.
Can't you see?
Thee can stay here another year, save another $150, and then buy thy own freedom.
What if next year Mr. Elliott's price is $600?
Well, I can't imagine.
What then? He's already said I'm worth $900.
I'm sure Mr. Elliott is a man of his word.
Do you know Mr. Elliott?
Not as thee does, Jesse.
That's right.
Thee is angry, Jesse.
That's right, too. Another year until I'm free?
I wish I could help thee, Jesse, but my conscience forbids it. I am truly sorry.
And I'm truly sorry also.
Scene 5. Jesse exits the study and steps outside. A door slams. Jesse finds Mingo in the dooryard.
Mingo, go for a walk with me. Away from here a little. Money. All they think about is money.
Who?
White folks. Doesn't matter if they be slaveholders or abolitionists. All that matters to them is money.
Can't help it. That's just the way they are.
All they think about is money. Even the Robinsons.
Well, now the Robinsons think about other things. Lots of other things.
Oh, yes. Like their principles.
What are you talking about?
We just got back a second letter from my master in North Carolina. He refuses my $150. He wants $300. Ain't that just like a white man?
All white people ain't the same, Jesse.
Says you. Mr. Robinson's got all kinds of money.
The Robinsons work hard for their money, and they are good people.
Mr. Robinson's got all kinds of money, but he won't loan me a measly $150 because it's against his principles. Principles? He says, I cannot support the institution of slavery.
Well, that's good, ain't it?
What good is that to me if he won't let me be free? Besides, what's he know about the institution of slavery? He ever been a slave?
No, but you know.
I don't know anything about the institution of slavery either. All I know about is being a slave.
Well, that's right. But
What's wrong with white people? What's wrong with that?
the Robinsons ain't all white people.
You keep saying that, but you ain't never gonna convince me. I want to be a free man. Mingo, free, like you. Like Rowland Robinson.
Mr. Robinson.
What?
Mr. Robinson.
Rowland Robinson. Ain't I a man too? Mingo, how can he deny me when he has this power to set me free? How can he deny me?
He doesn't want to. He just has his ways. His Quaker ways. He's stuck in them. He thinks too much. Quakers think a lot. They get all wrapped up in their ideas, and then they get stuck inside of them.
You mean all wrapped up and stuck inside their principles? What good are those principles to me? He can't loan me another $150 because it's against his principles? It's against my principles to be a slave.
The Robinsons have done a lot for you now, Jesse.
I'm trapped between the principles of a slave owner and the principles of a Quaker.
Those two men are not the same.
Maybe not. But what's the difference to me if they both end up acting the same way towards me? Maybe he just wants me to hang around here another year and be a slave.
Now you're going too far, Jesse.
Says you.
Mr. Robinson's trapped too. He's caught inside his own ideas.
You said that.
Yes, I'm saying it again. He's caught inside his own ideas, and he can't get free to see how much you need him. He's got his eyes on his big ideas, not on little old Jesse.
Well, I don't care about his big idea. I care about little me. Can't wait another year. Too close to free. What's his money compared to my life? I can't wait.
Well, what you gonna do instead?
Montreal is only 100 miles north of here. Canada. And that's real freedom, brother. Real freedom. I won't have to buy myself up there.
You're a hothead, Jesse.
So what?
And you're uppity.
You ain't uppity enough.
Watch yourself,
You're just
boy.
an old man.
Now watch it.
You're just an old man stuck in your old ways. What's been hanging out with white people too long?
I ain't been hanging around white people. I've been hanging around with the Robinsons.
What you talking about?
I'm talking about you and me. We different, Jesse. Only thing we got in common is the color of our skin.
That's the Bible truth.
Maybe you ought to go on up to Canada.
Maybe I ought to.
No one knows what happened to Jesse, but it appears that this episode and Jesse's argument with Rowland Robinson, if in fact they actually occurred, may have had some influence on Robinson. In 1841, just 4 years after this incident, Robinson recanted his position that one could not use money to purchase a slave's freedom. In an amendment to a motion at the 8th semi-annual meeting of the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society, Robinson offered wording that would make it acceptable for one to use actual cash dollars to purchase a slave's freedom for the slave's immediate emancipation. I said in my introduction that we have several agendas today, and one of them is to get your reaction, but I thought it might be easier for you folks to get engaged in conversation if we had some professional responders. So I'd like to invite Hal Colston, Joan Robinson, and Imani Whitfield to come up. They'll speak very briefly, throw some questions out to you, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
First of all, I would like to applaud David Budbill for capturing the complex relationships between slaves, slave owners, and abolitionists. I believe the opening with the spiritual balm of Gilead was very, very powerful, because in many ways that was the only hope that slaves could hang on to. And just to set up the context for my comments and questions, I just want to share a few things about what I believe. I believe that racism is a spiritual disease that was born out of slavery, American slavery. which I believe is one of the worst forms of slavery known to humankind. I believe that racism dehumanizes the perpetrators of slavery, and as well, it paralyzes its victims through internalized oppression. I believe that racism is an evil, has an evil nature, and its energy comes from powers and principalities that are greater than us. Confronting racism alone leads one to further suffering and isolation. Confronting racism in community can lead to healing. It's apparent to me that Jesse and Mingo are caught up in this institution of slavery, with Jesse wanting the respect and freedom of a man, and Mingo satisfied with subservience to Mr. Robinson. And he can't imagine being uppity. And for me, that's important to understand why. He can't imagine being equal. Ephraim and Rowland are both the gatekeepers of this evil institution, slavery, protecting its political and economic power. And for me, I would want to know, why are they blind to this? What is it that allows them to continue being gatekeepers at the suffering of slaves? I think the piece is very rich in ironies, and ironies are really important to bring out. Rowland professes to be a man of principles, yet he maintains this pseudo-solidarity with Jesse. Rowland, a man of speech, is rendered speechless by Jesse, who just asks for a loan of $150. And I would like to understand why he has to defend himself and lead to the hypocrisy of his defense. Ephraim, who's illiterate, tries to hang on to a losing cause, his farm, and selling a slave who could properly bring it into a position. Yet there is this tension of their relationship as they grew up together. And I would want to understand, why can't he be human around that? Ephraim strikes from his letter his relationship with Jesse that would acknowledge this humanness. And I think the struggle for that is important to understand. I think ultimately knowing who you are is so important. To me, it's apparent that Jesse is a field slave and Mingo is a house slave. And Mingo's comfortable and content, yet Jesse is anxious and longing to be free. I believe he's free in his mind, but he's not free physically. And he wants to go north to experience his freedom, yet ultimately he has to go far north to Montreal. And I would want to understand, why is Montreal, why is Canada a place where slaves can really experience freedom?
I too want to applaud the Rokeby for creating a play to help us understand these complex issues, and certainly to commend David and the actors for bringing it to 3 dimensions. I'm certainly a great believer in theater as a tool for that. I think that they were very successful, the play is very successful, in adding immediacy to the issues, to helping us make connections between the people and issues of the past and present, and certainly arousing curiosity of, so that we can understand and deepening more deeply the issues. My last name is Robinson. I want to say that right out, that I am not a member of the Rowland Robinson family, for which I'm sad. I don't think that my lineage in any way includes any of their noble acts. As I thought about it, what I'd like to say about the things that I liked and then wished for. What I really liked is I thought in the play that the dialogue really created clear and distinct characters, that it was snappy, that it moved it along, that there was a narrative thrust. My attention never flagged. I have read it a couple of times, I have heard it a couple of times, and yet my attention is still riveted. So I feel like it's very successful as a piece. What I liked the sounds at the opening to set the context. I really like the convention of fading between voices as the letters are sent back and forth. I thought that the final discussion between Mingo and Jesse was very believable dialogue. I liked the way that the ideas were constantly restated, like all of us do when we're trying to win an argument. Surely if we just say it a different way, it will work. One of the lines that Mingo said that I thought was just so strong is he's talking about Rowland in this way. He says, he caught in his own ideas and he can't get free to see how much you need him. I just felt like that was a really strong expansion of the concept of trapped and added layers of meaning to the title. Other lines that I particularly enjoyed was Jesse, at the very beginning, when he says, I'll get old on my own, but free I got to work at. I think that kind of resonated with my own personal understanding of aging. So I appreciated that. Additionally, I liked the lines that Rowland commented when Jesse was thanking him for his help at the very beginning. He said, I would do it for anyone in your predicament, and then underlined again, anyone, kind of doing the foreshadowing of, Jesse, you're not that important to me. You're a representative of something I feel stronger about. Jesse, I like Jesse's line of, I don't sincerely desire Mr. Elliott's prosperity and happiness. You know, certainly one that we all feel on occasion when we're putting sincerely yours. And through our own letters of complaint sometimes. And lastly, Jesse's reiteration of ain't I a man a couple of times, kind of conjuring up Sojourner Truth's very important line, ain't I a woman? Some suggestions or wishes that I had. One is, and perhaps this is one that I wanted to ask the question of. What I understand is that they're still very much in the process of trying to figure out how to indicate the changes of setting. And all I could base it on was the narration today, and what I wanted to suggest is that the sounds or music are made very strong to really indicate the difference between North Carolina and Vermont, the difference of the study at Rokeby Museum versus the dooryard versus the sheep. I just think that would help give us sensual images to really bring it to life. Wishes that I had is that I wish that I knew more about Jesse's desire to pay first rather than just to go to Canada in the first place. And I wanted to know how typical that was. I also wanted to hear more about Rowland. How did he free himself from his trap 4 years later? My druthers would be that it would add into the piece, either as a part of the play or as an epilogue, what perhaps led him to that decision 4 years later, and more importantly, what was the response, in order to broaden the context of our understanding of the anti-slavery movement in Vermont. Was the response like, what, kidding? Or was it, yeah, great? I also wished for more information about Rachel Robinson. Certainly I'm coming to this as a woman myself, being interested in her role, but from what I understand, that they were definitely compatriots in this cause, and I just felt like she probably did, put her voice into that decision of his in some way. And lastly, I just want to end with the fact that I really thank Rokeby for doing this, because already my curiosity is so deepened by it. And I really appreciate the bringing this concept to life, as it did, as this play did.
Can y'all hear me? All right. Okay. We don't have nice things like this.
to say UVM. No, I'm just kidding. My name is Imani Whitfield. I'm a professor of African American history at the University of Vermont. I'd also like to thank Rokeby and Jane and everybody for the wonderful play. I think it brings out all the complexities of American slavery that are very hard for me to describe or discuss in like 2 minutes. But there are a few things that did come up that I'd like to mention. The first thing I always think about when I think about Southern blacks who move up north, either before the Civil War or after the Civil War, is what was their life back in the South? And how did that inform their attitudes and decisions of what they do when they come up here? I would like to know, just as a researcher, more about Jesse's life in North Carolina. Was he a field slave, or was he also a domestic slave? Because his owner had only owned one slave, right, or two? And so Ephraim, by only owning 1 or 2 slaves, fits him into the majority of white American slave owners in the South in the antebellum period, in the sense that the majority of white slave owners own between 1 and 5 slaves. Okay? So it's very typical. And if it's just 1 or 2 slaves, he might be a field slave, but he also might be a domestic slave. And so he probably has extraordinarily close contact with his owner, and how that sort of influenced him, as opposed to, say, a black rice slave on the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina or Georgia, which is 300. I wondered how those dynamics sort of fit in, or what they would mean, and what they meant to him when he got to Vermont. So that was just one thing that came to my mind. I just have a few more points. Another thing that came to my mind was, which I found sort of interesting, and I know Frederick Douglass has this issue as well, but why does he feel like he needs to pay? That's my big question. It's almost like he believes in compensated emancipation. It's almost like the old anti-slavery societies, or like the American Colonization Society, which I'll come back to in a minute. I just finished writing a book about 1,700 free African Americans in Nova Scotia after the War of 1812, and I assure you, not one of them even ever thought to pay their owners a cent. And so I find, now of course they're in Nova Scotia, so maybe it's a different place, but there are so many ex-slave / free blacks in New York or Philadelphia or Boston or Albany or Rochester who would have never thought to pay them. So I find it interesting, why does this guy feel that he has to do this? Is this an influence of Mr. Robinson? I don't know. Is it something he just feels he has to do? Jane Bell maybe he felt insecure. I don't know. But it's something just to consider. Now for my 2 other bigger points that I'd like just to mention quickly. And one of them has to do with this idea of the complexity of American slavery. How do we reconcile our images of a black person being whipped and chained and bound and mutilated and had their family sold apart and so on and so forth with what we see in these letters, right? What you see in some of these letters with Ephraim is that this deep caring on some sick, twisted level, branching, of his slave, right? This sort of feeling of respect, this friendship. And I think, to come back to what you were saying earlier about this sort of evil of American slavery, or how slavery dehumanizes, that's all true. But I don't know any historian that won't agree with that. But what I think we're finding as we look more and more into the archives, and look more and more at slaveholders' diaries, or we read the testimony of slaves after the Civil War, is that, in fact, and this is what a very famous historian argued, I can't claim that I'm an original on this, but obviously is that in this system of slavery, you have cruelty, but you also have acts of kindness. You have total meanness, but you have friendship between masters and slaves. And how do we reconcile all of that inside of one system? Indeed, the laws of the South are meant, at least in the antebellum period, to dehumanize African Americans. There's no question about that. You can't read, you're a piece of property. But slaveholders themselves undermine these laws all the time by teaching their slaves to read, by introducing them to Christianity. And if slaves were truly a piece of property, dehumanized like a cow or a horse, then how can we have so many stories of slave owners reading the Bible to their slaves? Because they certainly weren't reading the Bibles to their horse or to a piece of furniture. So I wonder about how do we understand those aspects of American slavery. The last thing I want to bring up is sort of what comes through to me in this is sort of the sadness at being in New England or Vermont for free blacks or escaped slaves. A lot of free blacks who come up to what we can call the Boston states, okay? When they get here, they have very high hopes for freedom and high hopes in New York, Boston, maybe even Vermont, and most of the time, it doesn't quite work out so well. They're faced with a lot of racism. They are usually pushed into the most menial, poor-paying jobs, very little chance to rise. It is no mistake, though, I must mention, that during the antebellum period, that the number of skilled blacks, skilled free blacks, is higher in some southern cities where there's free black populations than they are in Boston or New York at certain times. To think about that as well. So I think what came up to me when I was listening to Jesse, you so eloquently put it, was that the only words I could come up with, I'm sorry if this is not eloquent, is the unfreedom of freedom in the North. The last thing I want to mention, though, is that at the same time that we have stuff that's going on at Rokeby and we have abolitionism in Vermont, we have another flip side of anti-slavery, which is very popular in Vermont that doesn't get as much attention, called the Vermont Colonization Society. And John B. Wheeler, one of our presidents at the University of Vermont, and whose building my office is in, which I think is very amusing, the Vermont Colonization Society that wanted to, as they put it, I'm quoting, get rid of this Negro population. They wanted to get rid of free blacks. It's no mistake that one of the most vigorous local auxiliaries of the American Colonization Society was, in fact, the Vermont Colonization Society, in a state with such a small black population. It was one of the most active. And they did not believe that free blacks could coexist in the United States in a biracial democracy. But they were also anti-slavery. So I think for me what comes out of this are all the complexities going on in Vermont and in the South, and how Southern slavery is connected with what we might call Northern freedom. And I'll put that in quotations and say thank you very much.
Well, it's a little later than I thought it would be at this point. We do have a reception next door, but if you want to ask a few questions or make some comments, and if you have specific questions for people, yes.
Wes Sanders from the Underground Railway Theater. I hope when you do have this exhibit at your museum that you put a historical frame around it so that some of the questions that Amani was raising about why this particular slave felt he had to pay for his freedom and why the abolitionist went along with the idea. My company has done several plays about the Underground Railroad, and it is also true that it's extremely rare. Before the Fugitive Slave Act, and I guess that's the historical piece. I think that's very important here. When it became a national question of law, having an escaped slave anywhere in the United States, and it was important to go to Canada. At this point, which is, I believe, the 1840s, well, Vermont was not a slave state, so there was no compulsion of law that would have made it necessary for this slave to buy his freedom. So why does this abolitionist who obviously...
Actually, that's not the case. First of all, this is a history exhibit, and we're going to do our best to deserve the money we got from the National Endowment for the Humanities, but you can see from these comments exactly how complex this story is. It's just, there's a million complexities, and we are going to do our best. And I think we've done a good job of raising them, which is just the start, because many of us just have that, big mansion and 300 field slaves, and there are many, many different ways this played out. Many people are unaware that before 1850, when the second fugitive slave law was passed, that there was a fugitive slave law. It was passed in 1793. Our forefathers were concerned that the Constitution was not quite clear enough on this matter, that slaves were property, and slaveholders had the right to get their property back. So they passed a law mandating exactly that. Well, this law didn't work out too well. People kept getting away. So they passed another law in 1850 that changed the mechanisms and with the hope of making it easier to get their property back. But by 1850, this country was deep in a sectional crisis that was kind of like the Cold War, or the war before the war, as some people call it. And it was also very political, and it had a lot of playing out of North against South. The impact it actually had on returning fugitives was not that terrific. Someone else.
When was the British Empire, like Canada, of course, was part of that? When was the Free Slavery Act in the 1820s, 1830s?
The British Empire ends slavery to 1834.
So therefore,
but it dies out in parts of British North America, or what will become Canada. Of course, there's no Canada until 1867, but it will slowly die out in different places at different times, depending on Nova Scotia and New Brunswick.
Jesse would have known that if you go to Canada, would you then automatically become free?
I think probably by the 1830s, people would know that.
Excuse me for dominating. My second question is, Vermont, too, of course, as you're very familiar with, the first state that prides itself on abolition of slavery. Secondly, even during this period in the 1830s, I'm a member of the Congregational Church, and we were very proud of our history of having several prominent black congregational ministers in Vermont in this period, and of course, and earlier. One in Rowland is famous, and your Middlebury, Timothy, our friend Mr. Twilight, Reverend from Burlington, and there were several others. We had one who preached in Jericho in the 1820s. So I'm very puzzled by, interested in your comments by Dr. Wheeler on how, I do wonder how in his own mind, because these black clergy were also very well educated, as well educated as white clergy at the time. So I'm puzzled why Wheeler was off on this anti-kick. Of course, we know Madison and others were earlier on in this thing and shifted them all back to Africa. But why Vermont?
I don't think that's a question we have a full answer to. I think the Vermont Colonization Society needs a lot of work. The ministers generally in the United States were very powerful, and there was another, even more associated in my mind, the bishop of the Episcopalian Church, John Hopkins, who was very well known for a number of things, but in the 1860s wrote some of the most thoroughgoing, ardent pro-slavery literature that you can find anywhere in the United States of America at the time. It's complex, it's not simple. Yes?
I don't know enough about the history of black-white relationships in Vermont, but I did relate to this play out of my own personal history as a sexual minority person. My partner and I moved to Vermont so that we could have a legal relationship. And we get here, and now the struggle is, do we have full equality? And we don't. I mean, you have these decisions in New Jersey and various places where state Supreme Courts are denying full equality and creating a second-class citizenship. And when Jesse says Montreal is only 100 miles away, I understand what he means.
Thank you. Yes?
As soon as I heard the first letter, I wondered why wasn't the bounty hunters couldn't just grab Jesse and take him back, because now Ephraim knew where he was. How did that play out?
I said in my introduction, and I maybe didn't dwell on it enough, one of the things that the letters in our collection, and there's several others concerning other fugitives in addition to Jesse, and they're completely consistent in stating that Vermont was a safe haven for fugitives in the 1830s and 40s. Now, this arises primarily from Vermont's physical distance from the slave South, and as we've been discussing, not from its welcoming open arms necessarily to fugitive slaves or free black people. There was racism in Vermont, obviously, but it was just a very long distance. Ephraim Elliott did not have much. He had lost his most valuable piece of property, the most valuable piece of property he was ever going to have. He never got another one. He had 75 acres worth $150. There was no way he was going to be able to reclaim Jesse. That's a very expensive proposition. And I think if you read some of what many historians have said, in the northern New England states, there wasn't all that much difference in terms of safety between northern New England states and Canada, which is interesting. We're talking about why does Jesse want this freedom paper so badly. Let me take one more question and then we'll adjourn to a reception. Yes?
I'm curious about the play. Is it, is David Budbill open to changing it a little bit? Right behind you, you might want to ask him.
Ask me.
Yes, I think he is.
This is the fourth draft, so does that answer your question?
Well, then I would make a suggestion to David Budbill that individual, personal stories hit home with all of us. So maybe if one could be fit in about why he valued $150 or something about his life, and he could just say, yeah, I remember something. Then we would know the unreader much more about it. I just know the story aspect of it rings true with everybody.
Let me just say a couple things. One is, as I said to David Hawkins, this was like writing a sonnet because I was told not to have a play longer than 12 minutes. Also, I had to create a piece of fiction in which there were actual historical documents. The first letter from Rowland T. I invented. The second letter, the first letter from Ephraim, the two letters from Ephraim are extant, and the second letter from Rowland is extant. The first letter I invented. Then I had to create the dialogue around those letters. That's all I had to work with were those letters. My interest was in a number of things, but especially in the personal relationship between Rowland and Jesse and Mingo, and developing that as much as I could in 12 minutes. But yeah, I'm open to all kinds of changes. I think one of the answers to, I would love to know more about so on and so on and so on, and you could if it was an hour long or 2 hours long.
I just want to say in response to that you've raised exactly one of the goals in our exhibit. The Underground Railroad is a kind of an amorphous concept, and there are these cartoon characters or cardboard characters that often populate the stories of the Underground Railroad. And it's our goal with this exhibit to make these people real, to take two fugitives who actually came to Vermont under very different circumstances. We know different things about them. We don't have the full story of either one. But through this exhibit, try to weave that narrative so that as you go through it, you begin to see what those personal stories are. And I actually have several documents from the North Carolina State Archives where we were able to research Jesse's background and find out the things that I told you in my introduction that we're going to have on display. But now what I'd like to do is invite everybody to go through those two doors, and we'll all be up there. You can ask questions of David and the cast and me and other staff and the board at Rokeby. Thanks again for coming.
Trouble